Tonight will be our annual Salary Cap Extravaganza, but first, our guys, Handsome Jack.
Broadcasting live to Bills Mafia Worldwide with Greg Tompsett and Aaron Quinn.
Welcome to the NFL. Doesn't matter what's happened before today. Today's a brand new day. It's a brand new season.
Your number one podcast for objective Buffalo Bills coverage. No matter where you are, we got you covered.
Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo Salary Cap Extravaganza. We are joined by wonderful talent across the spectrum of the Cover One podcast realm. Down below me, you see Mr. David Fox. How we doing, sir?
This is my one time of year where I do math homework. It's not much, but it is there. So yeah, I'm doing fine. I'm here. It's fun to always do this. So
absolutely, you guys know him on the Twitter streets as Low Buff of Ceilings, Mr. Chris Seth. How we doing, sir?
Gentlemen, doing well. I'm scared to say something stupid, but let's go for it.
Hey, sometimes that's the best way to do it. One half of the delightful air raid hour, Mr. David Tilton. David, how we doing, sir?
Delightful. I'm not sure I've ever been described as delightful, but I will take it. First time doing this one, so I'm excited about it.
Absolutely. The workhorse of Cover One. You see him in the film room. You see him in disguised coverage all over the place with the best shirt of the day. Anthony Prohaska is beautiful, celebrating the banana stand in true form. How we doing, sir?
I'm doing good. I've been watching all of the Indiana Jones movies back to prep up on my mythical knowledge because I figured it just tied in really well with what the salary cap is, which is just myth and fantasy. And I studied a lot of the tape, like Indiana's moves, a lot of the Temple of Doom action. So I feel like I'm really prepped and I'm ready to go.
I like it. Watch out for the big boulder. I think it's about to hit New Orleans. So
oh man, that's rough.
And Aaron, what are you doing here?
Honestly, I don't know why I agreed to this. I didn't do my homework, unlike David down there. I don't know. I'm just here for witty comments, and because I love you, Greg, and I know that this means a lot to you guys, and I know a lot of hard work has gone into it, so I'm happy to be a part of it. But just here for the witty comments and Arrested Development themed stuff.
I like it. To be completely honest, I'm actually upset with myself. If I hadn't been traveling this week, I would have cut like some clips from Arrested Development. I want to be able to work in. I do not understand the question, and I will not be responding to it. I just work in different things from the show. It'd be fantastic. All right, guys. So obviously tonight we're going to go through a couple different things. For anyone who hasn't seen it, I did do a quick salary cap update a couple weeks ago, just to kind of level set where we stand. So I wanted to be able to make tonight more kind of fun discussion and debate on some of the like less defined topics. So real quick, I'm going to go through a couple things on some of the areas that we know are pretty well defined and that, everybody's on close to the same page about, simply because they have to make some moves. So some of the things we're going to go through tonight is obviously everyone knows the Bills are the second lowest in salary cap space behind those previously mentioned New Orleans Saints. They are $50.6 million over the cap as of right now, if it were to start. So when the new league year comes, they will make plenty of moves. We're going to talk through, I don't think there'll be a lot of discussion tonight on things like Josh Allen's base salary restructure or some of the other guys, Ed Oliver, Connor McGovern. We might have a little discussion on some of the extensions with Dawkins or Rasul Douglas or Taron Johnson. We will be discussing whether to go through Stefon Diggs or not. So we'll kind of leave that as is. There's a lot of players that come up with the potential for either releases or pay cuts. So I'll leave some of those open in, possibilities that we could go through, whether to release them, whether to negotiate a pay cut, what the ramifications could be for each of those guys. And then in the other show, I talked about a couple other restructures that, I wasn't a big fan of, but we'll put those on the table tonight. There might be a good argument from some of the guys on where they would go. So all of the different moves that I had rattled off, there were 7 in the extensions or restructures. There were another 7 in releases or pay cuts. those two together took it from not only 50 million over the cap, but they created $80 million in moves to put the Bills $30 million under the cap. Now that would be doing all 14 moves, including 13 million from Stefon Diggs, including approaching Tre White for a pay cut instead of a restructure or an extension, some different pieces like that, only getting a pay cut from Mitch Morse, not releasing, which would be almost 8.5 million if they release Mitch Morse. So some of those moves are ones we're going to talk through tonight. But this is the baseline of where a lot of that discussion comes from so that everybody's on the same page and what we're looking for in the different possibilities, where if they did all of these, they could get to 40.8 million. It actually, a lot of these guys here, if there were releases done instead of pay cuts, it could go as high as 50 million, the amount of space they could create, which is over $100 million swing from 50 million over to 50 million under the cap. So, with that in mind, knowing that this is kind of the menu we have to choose from, this is kind of the potential opportunities that they can move throughout. We're going to go through, and I sent the guys a handful of different topics that we were going to start with, and be able to go through a few that we know. I certainly saw in response to that update show, and in some of the comments on Twitter. And the two most common names that came up were Stefon Diggs and Tre White. So we're going to start there. I'm going to go around the room to the guys here and get some thoughts on the possibilities, where they see those things going. And we will go ahead and get started. I'll just go around the room right to my starting to my left here. Anthony, we'll start with you. The Stefon Diggs contract is not an easy one to go through because
that's not what Twitter said. Twitter said it's super easy and he can just be traded or released and everything is fine.
No big deal. I think people don't quite realize how early into his extension we are in reality, because they did it ahead of time. So a lot of the newly guaranteed money is still happening right now. A fair amount of it would not go anywhere, even with a trade. A lot of times there's contracts that are really, really bad if you release him, but are a little more palatable if you trade him. Diggs is one of those. Like, it's actually equal, penalty to trade him as it is to release him. Where is your head at as far as seeing him, the film work you guys have done on the show, talking about some of the potential injuries? Where is your head at with Stefon Diggs and whether to take an aggressive move or to hold the line and keep our options open in the future?
The Joe Brady aspect of it all is like the biggest wild card, with just looking at Diggs's usage and how drastically the production went down as the season went along, and Brady took more ownership of this offense. But and I know there's some potential rumblings, like, was he kind of banged up? Was it oblique related? Was there something where he wasn't comfortable? Yada yada. I still think from a roster standpoint, I don't think he's going anywhere. 2, I think you need Stefon Diggs. 3, I still think he is Stefon Diggs. Even if you're just using him as a gravity player to draw people towards him, to open things up for the Dalton Kincaids of the world and the run game aspects out of the backfield, and whatever wide receiver 2 they address this offseason, whether we know they're going to have to add somehow, some way between free agency and the draft. But I think for as much of the conversation has kind of been like, oh, what's wrong with Stefon Diggs? I still think for a large part, Stefon Diggs is Stefon Diggs. He maybe potentially lost a step a little bit, and he was never the biggest burner or vertical threat downfield to begin with, but he can still route up almost anybody in the NFL. He's a technician. He still has Josh Allen's trust. How he works in this offense is tremendously important. And so I'm not looking to make him go anywhere or do anything to make him more upset as he is. The trickiest part with all of it is just, how do you restructure? How do you approach him? Is he prickly in his demeanor if you approach him about it? Because Greg, you make an excellent point of like that new money kicking in. Like, his cap hit this past season was 14.8 million. This year it's 27.8, and then it stays at 27 next year, jumps up to 28, and then goes down to 22.5 in 2027. But that's what makes it so tricky to, like, even if everybody and their mother was like, he sucks, we need to get rid of him, and he wanted out, you can't.
Aaron, where's your head at as far as what you saw early in the season versus late in the season? And does that give you anxiety or apprehension about playing with his contract to give us more room if it meant adding more talent?
So I want to hold on this contract for a number of reasons. The point that you made about like you're really stuck on the guaranteed money at this point anyway, and aging out, like these types of deals are the ones you want to make on younger guys that you have under contract that you know are going to be around for a long time. This is a couple of times now, whether he was injured or not. This is a few times where his production sort of declined at a certain point in the season. He didn't show up in the playoffs. I'm not as mad as a lot of people are about that. I also think when you splice up a very small sample size sport like football and you start to splice it up into smaller sample sizes, you can see big dramatic changes. And it doesn't always indicative of any one thing or Ant brought up the example. Some of it was Brady. Some of it could have been an injury. Some of it was other guys were actually also more productive, and there's only one football to go around. And so that gravity that he pulls allows other people to have that kind of production. I think Stefon Diggs is still going to be 100 catch, 1,000 yards wide receiver here for the near future. Nothing I've seen changes that. They have to find ways to get him the ball, but I think this is one you hold on. He's still, even if he is slightly declining, so he's been a top 3 to 5 wide receiver his whole time in Buffalo. Maybe he's in the top 10 now as he like starts to decline. I'm okay staying with this contract where it is. I think he will make people forget a lot of how they feel right now once the season ramps up again next year. And you just got to eventually replace that over the next couple of years. But I think you hold for now and see, you do have more options in the future with this contract.
Dave, anything different from that perspective? Or I'll put it this way. I think some people, I know a lot of people use both of the most common websites, Over the Cap and Spot Track. Spot Track will put in a line that their definition of what a potential out is in a contract, and they put it as a potential out in 2025. It's a $22.2 million dead cap hit to save $5 million. I don't know if I would define that as a potential out. I am actually under the impression he has to be on this team for 2 more years at a minimum, because I'm not going to pay $22 million for him not to be on the team. So part of me, and I'll put this to you, Dave, looking at it that way, that let's say we're not in the business of eating $22 million to not have Stefon Diggs. If that means he's on this team for 2 more years, no matter what, does that change your perception of the risk or downside of kicking $13 million into the future for more room this year to mess around? Or is it you need to have the discipline not to always kick every can down the road, and that even though you may not be able to get out of it, you technically could, and it would just be painful? Whereas if you do the $13 million into the future, you can't. It would make it where it's a negative, where you literally would have no savings if you were to do that. Is that too much risk? If it means that, I won't go as far as to say it means nuclear winter and that we can't do anything, but it might mean maybe choosing Daquan Jones or a defensive end. Like, you probably couldn't do both. You probably couldn't do Epinesa and Daquan, or Leonard Floyd and Daquan. You would have to choose one or the other. And almost every free agent would be whatever the 1.77 million is for this year. They would be very, very limited in their ability to do anything even less than last offseason if they don't do the Stefon Diggs move. Are you willing to make that trade-off for the security of not making it more difficult down the line?
It's a tough one. I mean, I lean towards not touching this contract if at all possible. And the reason I say that is because you have so many guys that are expiring contracts on this roster right now, and you have so many bodies that you need to fill, especially on the defensive side. So if I'm going to choose like one of Daquan or one of a defensive end, I almost would say like, well, is it really realistic that you're going to be able to do both of those anyway, even if you were to restructure Stefon Diggs' contract this year? And let's not forget either that what life was like without Stefon Diggs or before Stefon Diggs, where we were piecing together like a John Brown and those types of receivers. And, Stevie Johnson was the best receiver we had for years with those 3 straight 1,000 yards. Like, let's not pretend like all of a sudden he's some below average wide receiver, right? He's still a probably top 10 at worst, top 15 at worst wide receiver in the NFL. And I think his skill set will age out fairly well. Like Ant said, he's not necessarily a burner. And I think that the way he approaches the game, his relationship with Josh Allen, I personally would try to do everything I could to take attention off of Stefon Diggs this offseason. And if that means not touching his contract and finding a way to kind of keep that one option, like that one bullet in your gun, then I would try everything I can to not touch it. Now, I know that might not be possible, but I would lean towards not touching it and just giving yourself a little bit more flexibility down the road.
Greg, you're on mute. Happens to the best of us.
You know, I was just sharing the screen here to show that the 4-year, $96 million extension starts this year. This is the first year of his 4-year extension because we did it early while there was a year and a half left on his deal, which did not go unnoticed by some other players on the team because Brandon Beane very regularly had told players he doesn't do extensions 2 years ahead of time.
And then
he made two exceptions. Josh Allen, I think, is a much more acceptable exception in almost everyone's mind. Like, I think they kind of get the quarterbacks are different, but he made an exception in Stefon Diggs, and that makes it feel like a lot of people are like, oh, why remember when we did that extension a while ago? And it's because they agreed to it in 2022, but it didn't actually start until this year in 2024. So that's why so many of these are so painful. And when you look at it this year, a trade or a release is, $3 million worse. He would cost $31 million to trade away. It would lose money to trade him or cut him. And when I said that for next year, they list this as a potential out, and just, in my opinion, 22 million dead cap to save 5 million is not an out. That's not a feasible maneuver, even waiting until 2026. In 2026, 3 seasons from now, it's 13 million in dead cap to save 15 million, but we would still be eating 13 million in dead cap. So this is structured in a way that he's going to be on this team for quite a while. So Chris Seth, is that something that you I guess I'll put it to both David and Chris, just because we don't have to continue if no one feels differently. Is anyone interested in restructuring this because they think the 13 million is too valuable to this offseason?
Yeah, I don't. If you can avoid doing this, don't do it. Right? Like, it doesn't really. I understand it's a tight situation. You're pretty far over the cap right now. There's other solutions than just like immediately going to that particular button. And I think that let's just sort of dispel this whole ridiculous asinine narrative about Stefon Diggs and like, well, he's not getting targets, he's not doing this. It's like I hear it in national media, and it's the only reason I bring it up. It's just this whole idea that like he wasn't getting enough targets, or that's why he's upset, or blah blah. It's just like, it's all this very made up garbage, and it doesn't really make any sense if you just like watch the game and see what's going on in front of you. But not everyone does that, so that's why we're here. As far as like, do you trade him now to maybe you sell high on it? It's just like nothing about moving on from Stefon Diggs makes any sense. So you don't do that, obviously. And then as far as restructuring goes, does that make much more sense? Not really, unless you have to. And maybe they do have to, but if you can avoid doing that, avoid doing that.
Chris?
Yeah. I guess maybe I'm a little more okay with restructure than the rest of the group. Like, I'm fine with it. If like Eric and Ant pointed out, we're looking at a handful of explosive plays that make a significant difference on what Diggs' second half looks like. And so that tied to what I'm fully convinced he was hurt. Like we never showed up on the report, but Kyle at Banged Up Bills has pointed this out with the abdominal stuff. And like, I'm convinced he was hurt. And so those two factors combined for me to say, I'm not worried about restructuring him, for this moving forward. Like, physical dominance, speed hasn't been the main components of his game. Like, so thinking about this being, a steep cliff of a physical decline for him. Like, I don't think that all of a sudden happened in 1 week, week 9.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm comfortable with it.
So,
Hey, Greg,
go ahead.
I've got a question for you that's a little bit out of the Stefon Diggs thing, but in talking about some of these where we kick the can down the road, and I think there's a bit of an anxiety in Bills Mafia of Josh Allen's prime and being up against the cap in his prime, knowing that he's getting big money. But what do you think in terms of like waves of chances at windows and how high you can get that window open with a roster? At 27 years old, we know most quarterbacks don't win Super Bowls until they hit that like 30, right around 30 years old. Is there another wave coming up in those 2 to 3 years where this team will be in a position to restock for another run, and that Josh Allen's prime is maybe a little bit longer than the anxiety that people have about it?
So there are definitely some easier structures coming, and a lot of it is because look at the guys who played well this year on rookie contracts. So seeing Spencer Browns and Khalil Shakir's and Terrell Bernard and Christian Benford and so many players contributing, if we see that continue and we have more contributing positive draft classes, it opens that up significantly. So right now we've needed to have a lot of quality depth because we didn't have it. We had some nice hits in each class, but not large chunks of people contributing. And that lets a lot of that have more flexibility. So right now, some of the future draft classes or some of the future salary cap years are actually in better shape than what we are now. And we won't do everything all the way through each of the future years, but it actually gets back into, next year in 2025, it's projected at already 30.8 million in cap space. So now a lot of that will get soaked up with new draft classes, and we will sign some guys to extended years and things like that. So maybe that comes back down, and maybe we go into next year at like net equal, but we're not going to be 50 million in the hole again, is the key. So some of those different pieces, we have a lot more, 2 years from now, it's really hard to go through there because there's only 17 guys on the roster. But that's 106 million below the cap. So a lot of that is set up where if we have more good contributing draft classes, that's going to allow us to get back into a spending mode, even with Josh Allen counting in some of those years as, $52 million. So without having to play with his number, because at some point here soon, we're going to need to take our medicine and not do a restructure on Josh. We're going to have some of those seasons coming up here. So, and just in kind of summary, I'm actually closer to Chris on the Stefon Diggs piece, only in a pragmatic sense that since we can't get out of this contract in either of the next 2 years, and even if we wanted to move on from it 3 years from now, it's still eating 15 million to get 13 million in space. So I basically have just accepted that, hey, he's going to be on this roster for 3 more years. In the next 2 years, we're not going to be $50 million in the hole. So just in looking at it in that sense, I can use that $13 million a lot more right now than what it will mean in the next 2 seasons when there's other movable pieces and a much healthier starting point. And that saving it until then, I think, is a lot of folks telling themselves something that isn't true, that, if we don't do it this year, it means we can move on from him next year. And that's not the case. We're not going to cut a $22 million dead cap hit to save $5 million to move on from him. And I think a lot of people have it in their head that, we'll hold the line and this will be his last year in Buffalo. And it's not going to be. So I think it is the fiscally responsible thing. I do think it is the right discipline and the right idea of holding the line, but I think the circumstances are strong enough that I would support it. So I'm really curious to see. I don't think there's an obvious answer that Bean is for sure. Like there's a handful of the ones I listed out of the 14 moves that I'll bet a ton of money. Like this is going to happen. These ones are going to happen. That one, I don't know, but I think I lean 55% yes and 45% no. Amp?
Yeah, I know I wasn't asked that question directly, but I was gonna say, like, I second that notion and piggybacking off of Chris as well, just because I don't think, like, kicking that can potentially down the road is, you always like to say of like what you save this year and how you spread it out. Like, it's not severe enough of a deterrent given what his current cap hits look like for the rest of the lifespan of this contract. Like, you're not setting yourself up for significant failure or this albatross like a couple of years from now. And exactly to your point, like, it's not providing you, there's no out later where it's like, well, if you do that, then you're screwed for the out in 2025. It's like, no, there is no out in 2025. Like everything you were breaking down on Spot Track, like even if you wanted to play the other side of it of like best case scenario of like, oh, you do post June 1st stuff, and then you can spread the dead cap hit out in that year and the year after. No, it's still like severe. You're still having to pay 13 million like in the next year and following, and so on and so forth. So, and given where they are now, and this is also part of it too, like I've talked a bunch already about how important this offseason is, because Josh Allen's contract is starting to kick in, and you are starting to get to a spot with the defensive line where you need to retool and refuel and set yourself up better for the future. Like, I think this offseason is very important to lock down core pieces for a couple of years from now. And so I think that $13 million is a very valuable piece in this offseason. And the problem of like that restructuring down the road, I don't think is severe enough to deter me from wanting to create that cap space now.
So yeah, I agree. I think it's, again, I don't feel strongly enough to say I'm for sure that it's going to happen, but there's enough reasons and it gets tight enough. So a handful of folks have tried to make the case that, oh, if you trade him after June 1st, it's only a $9 million, $8.8 million dead cap hit for this year. And I think what they don't keep in mind is we're already 50 million over the cap. We have to pull so many levers and flip so many switches just to get our head back above water. We start to run out of switches to flip to then find another $8 million to cover for Diggs, while creating another starting spot hole that you then need to fill with less money. So unless someone is trading us after June 1st, so the draft's already over, so you can't do it for a draft pick. After June 1st, someone is trading us a rookie scale contract of a starting caliber receiver. It would make no sense. And even then, I don't know that we could, like, technically I could probably figure out how to do it, but it would be very hard to do.
And then you're still having the $22 million in dead cap the following season, which is still a problem.
when I just said, hey, we're finally 30 million under the cap next year, that would eat up, 75% of it immediately. All right, so Dave, let's start with you. We'll switch. And the second most common name that came up was interesting, because when I did the show, I said that I thought this was oddly similar to the year after Mitch Morse, his scares with the concussions, which thankfully we've now gone a healthy number of years without having any of that, which has been wonderful for him and his family. But even in that offseason, it was kind of awkward that, like, hey, we know we're not 100% sure about your future, so we're going to need to restructure your contract and do a pay cut. I'm kind of wondering if Tre White is now in that boat where, hey, we still like you a lot as a leader in the locker room. We're still fully in the belief that you're going to come back from this Achilles, and we know that there's new techniques and technology in Achilles surgeries, and the guys are now coming back in 4, 5, 6 months, and it's not a career-ending injury like it used to be. But it is $6 million in savings if we cut you. We don't want to have a $10 million dead cap hit. You don't want to be out there on the market when you're recovering from an Achilles tendon. So why don't we find a nice number in the middle that makes everybody happy? So that's why I projected it as a $3 million pay cut. where it was, hey, and we can give you a little bit of it back in some unlikely to be earned incentives, because if you play a full season, you'll earn some of the money back. I went with it that route. Some people asked, hey, why don't we cut him and save the $6 million? And other people went the other way and said, hey, why don't we restructure it and actually save even more money to do it other than a pay cut? So I'll start with you, Dave. Where are you at on Tre White, whether it's your expectations of what he could be or what we should see as his potential coming back, and what that does in what you're willing to do with the contract?
Yeah, I mean, I would, like, contract aside, I think you need to have, if you're Brandon Beane or even Sean McDermott, have like a real heart-to-heart with Tre White about where his head's at around what his future wants to be as far as playing football, right? Does he want to really continue? Obviously, he's going to put the work into rehab. How much does he really want to push it and come back? We saw the mental hurdle he had to clear just to come back from the ACL injury. There's this other element that, again, it's a business, but there's an element of good faith here as well. This was Sean McDermott's first pick he ever made as the head coach. He was basically the cornerstone player that kind of brought us back out of this drought. And I think a message to the locker room to cut him would not be, in my opinion, the right move. I think if his head's there and he wants to truly come back and he wants to be part of this team and be a significant contributor, I do agree with you, Greg, that it would make sense and be a happy medium for him to come in, maybe take a pay cut, gets to kind of continue to be in a comfortable setting, in a familiar setting where he can come in and rehab and do all that. And like you said, maybe he does come back and he kind of earns some of that money back, and he's still earning a pretty penny, right? It's not like he's all of a sudden not making a lot of money. And by the way, he's only under contract through next year anyway, right? It's through 2025. So to me, that makes a lot of sense. If he does come back and he plays and he takes a pay cut this year, maybe he earns some of it back in 2025. But I think the first thing has to be is, like, where's his head at from a football standpoint? Does he want to go through this recovery and truly come back? You would like to think yes. We don't know that. We assume yes, right? But we also saw kind of like the mental struggle he had to battle through with that ACL injury. And we saw how in the moment it really killed him in the emotion we saw when he had the injury last year on the field. So I think if he's there mentally, I think it would be make total sense for them to kind of come to an agreement on a slight pay cut.
Yeah, I'm torn. There's been a couple questions in the chat. Jeffrey asking here, can you legally cut a hurt player? Bob saying you can't cut a player on IR. I'm trying to find out the official time frame of when that carries over into the new league year. And if a player was on injured reserve last year, when the new league year starts and it's the 90-man roster, I don't believe the injured reserve is still the designation. And I think it goes into, does the contract have injury guarantees? So that's my current understanding. And that the last year that Tre White's contract had injury guarantees was last season in 2023. There are no injury guarantees into 2024. So I'm not 100%. I've tried to poke around to find that, because at first my head was, oh, you can't cut a player while he's injured. And that's true during that season. But I don't know if that's, I believe once we go into the new league year, and that you don't actually put anyone on injured reserve until August and September, I believe that Tre is simply one of the 90-man roster spots. And if you don't have injury guarantee protection in your specific contract, I believe they could release him. So I'm still working to confirm that. I got a couple contacts I sent some messages to, but that's my current understanding. But it's a perfectly good question, because that is, there are often times where that is the case, and we do have lots of guys on the Bills roster where they do have injury guarantees in their contract. Anyone usually in the first year or two of a new contract, they have those in there. But I don't believe that's going to qualify for Tre White as of March 14th. Once we get past March 14th, I don't believe that's going to qualify for him any longer. Chris, what are your thoughts on Tre, where there's honestly a good handful of options of kind of keep it as is, release, pay cut, restructure. There's quite a few things that they could play around and do with him.
Yeah, I think Tilt really has the crucial point is about Tre's mindset, because that's for me, these are incidental injuries, right? This isn't cartilage, wearing down. They're not chronic repetitive injuries. He had an ACL, he had a torn Achilles. How invested is he in working back from this? Because I think we could get back to 80 to 90% of Tre White if he wants to do that. So I guess for me, approaching him with a pay cut would be the first option in this scenario to free up a little bit of wiggle room. And if we were going to do the restructure, that's probably the last one I'd look at doing. Because even though I'm not concerned about the injury history being chronic, like it's about the combination of major injuries with his mindset, like how interested isn't he going beyond 24, 25, looking at another contract, so I think that mindset is really crucial.
So, Mr. Fox, looking at it with what we know, and maybe it doesn't even have to be a straight pay cut. Maybe it could just be, hey, you only played 4 games last year. We could do some not likely to be earned incentives for games played where we could convert a bunch of your salary into per game, like heavy per game roster bonuses. And every game from the 5th game to the 17th game wouldn't count on the salary cap until he played it going afterwards, where, hey, all you gotta do is play every game next year and you earn all your money back, the full amount that's there, but we get some protection in the case you can't. We would be able to structure it that way. That's one way that they could take his, I think it's 8.3 million of his deal as salary. You could basically make it 500,000 a year or 500,000 a game as a per game roster bonus, and only about 2 million of that would count as against the salary cap, and the other almost 6 million wouldn't count, but he could still earn it back. Do you think that's a way to approach him, or would you do something differently?
So I think that regardless of what happens, whatever you decide to do with him, the thing that makes me hesitant to the thing that I don't want to do is move on from Tre White, because of the fact that there seems to be a lot of indications that this defense is going to be making changes, specifically with how they play coverage. And you have a lot of corners on this roster. You have Elam, you have Benford, you still have Tre White, and Rasul Douglas, obviously. There's a lot of corners that are talented and have done different things at different levels for this team. But if you're going to, because the implications of the moves that they've made to the coaching staff seem to be they want to play a bit more man coverage. They want to be more of that style rather than this sort of zone team that they were with Leslie Frazier and also with John McDermott last year. Well, Tre White, when he came out of college at LSU, was kind of known as he's not necessarily a true zone corner. He's not necessarily a true man corner. He can kind of do both. And if that's the sort of look that you want, in addition to obviously the energy, the leadership that he brings in the locker room, I don't think you could just let that walk out the door, despite the risk that he brings as an injury. But I think that you have to be able to look at that holistically. You have to be able to figure out what's going to work best. If you can get him to do those, sort of not likely to be earned incentives, if you can kind of lower what his overall hit will be, sure, go ahead and do that. But I don't know how realistic that is, because the reason why a team does that and approaches that is the same reason why a player is absolutely not. You're not taking away my guarantees. If I'm gonna leave, I want as much guaranteed money as possible. This is just sort of the nature of this whole sport. So I don't really know what the best solution will be, other than find a way to keep Tre on this team and have him continue to work back. And as Tilt brought up, right, you gotta figure out where he's at mentally, because that initial injury that he had, the ACL tear, obviously took a long time for him to come back because he had not really had any sort of major injury his entire football career, which is crazy to think about for a cornerback. Crazy. And then to have another injury, another devastating injury, both of which are non-contact, just again, and we all saw it when it happened against Miami. We all saw just how devastating. He knew exactly what had happened. He knew
slamming his
season
helmet,
was
slamming
over.
his fist down.
He was devastated. So you gotta figure out where he's at. You gotta figure out how much he's going to be able to play just this season, right? How much is he going to be able to contribute this season? And even if he doesn't, you're still in a relatively good position because of the depth that you have there. But at the end of the day, like, a healthy Tre White is still better than all these other corners on the roster. That's why you want to keep him around.
Yeah, no, his is the toughest one for me because of how, so when you look at this, there's two things that are coming up. I think the reason teams can go to a player for a pay cut is because they have the leverage to say, hey, are you going to make more money than that on the open market? And $6 million is not nothing. And coming off the injury, I'm not sure, but I kind of think he would make more than that, but I'm not certain. He also has a roster bonus that's due on March 18th. So very likely they have to have this discussion prior to that to have that very, probably included in what that restructure or thing would be. So which direction would you go? Would you go pay cut? Would you go restructure? Would you ride it out as is? How would you approach a guy who's been a cornerstone of this franchise?
I'm going with the pay cut. I'd like to do that for like everybody. I think it'd be awesome if you could just have like everybody take pay cuts. Like the more guys you can have that just don't want more money,
just don't want money. Can you just give us a little bit of money back? Can you just play for less money?
We've also talked about that at Cover One a little bit. Just again, no, just
that's fair. Yeah. Could you just continue to do your job at the same level and good output? But can we pay you less to do it?
Like just pay you less? Is that possible?
I think that's a great business model. Apparently Tom Brady did it for like ever, and that's on the Patriots, won all these rings. But besides that, I'd approach him for the pay cut. And I'm with you. I think it's close to like a 50-50. Like if he were to go to the open market, are people looking at him as damaged goods and are kind of buyer beware? Or is someone like, oh, Tre White's out there, like, here's $8 million a year to come and like join my secondary and do that piece. Either way, I don't want him going anywhere. We don't know what's going to happen with Micah Hyde. It doesn't look like he's returning. Jordan Poyer is going to be in the last year of his contract. This secondary is going through changes, starting to go forward. I would like to have some semblance of consistency in the back end with the secondary from a leadership, knowledge, systematic perspective. And I think Tre provides that. Especially, and then I don't want to spoil anything, but, hopefully they extend Rasul Douglas and then you get kind of another little presence with that piece. But it's also from a positional value standpoint as well. Despite what the cap hit is, despite the injury pieces, I'm okay with Tre coming back as CB3 in November or December or whatever it is, like behind Benford or behind Douglas. Who knows? Maybe with all the new schematic changes, this is still going to be primarily a zone defense. They're still going to be playing match coverage. They're just going to get more man that gets worked into it. I would expect to see more man coverage in high leverage situations like on third downs and low red zone pieces and things like that. But this isn't going to be like, oh, they're going to go from like 61% zone to 61% man. So, and also to David's point, even if they did do that, Tre, when healthy, can still do either. I mean, he popped his Achilles locking down Tyreek Hill one-on-one in man coverage on a fourth down or third down or whatever that was. Granted, there was a safety over the top, but you can never have enough corner depth. And despite the fact you don't want to be, you don't want to have a corner 3 or a corner 4 with a $16 million cap hit. If the playoffs this year taught us anything, if the playoffs last year taught us anything, you are going to have guys at high value premium positions go down. Corner is 100% one of those things. Even if he's just a safety net, and Benford's crushing it and Douglas is crushing it and Tre's working his way back, I like having him as a safety net in 2024. And then we'll see what he looks like coming back in 2025. But I want him a part of this roster now. I want him as part of this roster for the rest of the lifespan of his current contract in 2024 and 2025. If he works his way back and is the Tre White of old, then he's a UFA in 2026. And you're looking at, potentially bringing him back, especially if things go well here. He loves it here. The franchise did right by him. Maybe he's more willing to stay, so on and so forth. I'm not looking to jettison him anywhere. And so the pay cut is the best option for me because you get to keep him and also save some cap space. But even if he said, no, I don't want that pay cut, I'm cool with just letting him rock because of the value that he provides at a premium position, even though he will be working back from a devastating injury again.
So, Aaron, where's your head at on what we should expect from Tre, assuming whatever we work out from a contract standpoint? A lot of stuff tells you that from the new Achilles surgeries and the recoveries from that, he should be ready for mini camp, let alone training camp. And that people wondering, is it a full year thing and he might not be ready till November? I don't believe that's going to be the case with this. Do you expect to see him, assuming the contracts work out, as one of the two starting cornerbacks, and that it's more likely it's, Tre and Rasul Douglas, and we're trying to figure out where to put Benford? Or are you assuming that there's a possibility that he's just some really expensive luxury cornerback 3?
Yeah, no, I'll push back a little bit. And I don't mean this in a rude way at all, but the talk of the mindset thing, I don't see that at all. That ACL injury is a lot different than the Achilles injury, and it's coming back from an ACL injury. We saw Vaughn do it this year, and Greg, you've heard me 100 times talk about this isn't a year recovery. Everybody thinks ACL is, all right, you get surgery, you're back in a year. It does happen for some people. Those are anomalies. It is not the norm for this type of injury. It's a full year and a half. And a lot of Bills players have suffered this injury, and they all talk about how hard physical therapy is for an injury like this, how hard it is to get back to trusting your body. Tre White, you don't get that number 1 jersey at LSU unless you're made up of the right mindset and the right stuff to be a pick that a team makes you their first pick in a new era with a coach. He's a captain type person for a reason. So I think his mindset's going to be totally fine. I think that is a devastating injury for a super athletic guy. It took a while for him to come back. And we saw when he finally did get back, he was right. Everyone wanted to rush him back, but he wasn't ready. He wasn't the Tre White that he expected to be until he got into this next season, this past year, and then unfortunately got the Achilles injury. But Achilles, to your point, they aren't what they used to be, and it isn't the devastating injury that it used to be. And you're seeing guys come back in the same season and perform. So I think he will be. We heard Sean McDermott talking about he's in here every day. If you could see Tre White's the hardest working dude, if you could see it, I'm going to take him at his word on that. And I think I'm much more high on Tre White here. And I think this is a few part move too, Greg. I think this is in line with, as Ian said, this is kind of goes with also extending Rasul Douglas. And that's the conversation I'd have with Tre. We took care of you. We made you the highest paid cornerback for a day at one point. And they've been good to him. He's made a lot of money to play here. Situationally, it hasn't gone. They haven't gotten the value out of that money. I think he has some loyalty to this team in those moves. I think he'll take a little less, whether it's the pay cut. I'd also be open to a restructure where we get him. I think he's going to recover fine and we'll get some good years out of him. I want to team him up.
Restructures $4.4 million in savings, so it's not an insignificant number.
And I think you can do that. And I think you could pair it up with a Rasul Douglas restructure. And I think those are your starting cornerbacks going into the future. I love Benford as a move piece that can do some different things. You're losing Taylor Rapp. I know there's been a lot of talk about Benford kind of being that Cam Lewis role that I think he could be better at it. He's a better run defender. I think he could fit some of that. Maybe you could work him in some nickel situations or bring him down in the box a little bit more. I think he can do some of that and cover some tight ends. So I think he provides more versatility. And as a fan, I want to see Tre White. I think David said it, an 80% Tre White is even better than a lot of what the cornerbacks are out there in the league. And Rasul has proven that he can be a number 1 corner still, and he's still got that. So you got 2 guys that are really, maybe they're not the top corners in the league, but they can both start on every team in the NFL. And then you have really good depth that is right now on rookie deals. So there's no need to change any of that if you can save a little bit of money now and maintain your starters. So I'm much higher on the Tre White thing. I think he will recover from this injury fine and get back similar to the player that we've seen.
Yeah, let's certainly hope so. So those were the two most controversial ones. So now we'll do a little bit more rapid fire. You guys saw the kind of menu that I went through. So as those are the options that I put there, I'm going to go around to everybody. What are some moves? Pick out one move that you would maybe make different from what that was, or that was something that wasn't even proposed in my workup. Is there anything that we go around? I'll start with you, David. Fox, we'll start down the bottom left. Were there any moves that you had differently than from my list, or that was something I didn't even have on my list that you think is one we need to consider here?
Nothing pops out to me. There's one that I think we'll get to later that I might have words about, but for now, there's nothing in the obvious list that's like, yeah, no, I don't really have any strong differing opinions, much as I do like to be the contrarian, but not this time.
I respect it. All right, I'll open it up there. Chime in. Who has one that's different from my list, or that wasn't on the list, that you think is more likely to happen, or maybe one I had prefer not to, that you think is more likely? I'll say, I think in Joe Biscaglia's proposal, he had both Dawson Knox and Ryan Bates as restructures that he wanted to do, and they were ones I wasn't excited to do, that I wanted to keep the options available there. Chris, Tilt, and any that you guys had that were outside of there?
Yeah, I'll go. I mean, I think that I look at Nyheim Hines and I look at Deontay Hardy, right? And I think about what each of those guys could bring to the table. And you look at both of them carrying a cap number over $5 million prior to any kind of pay cut or release. And to me, it's like, I would say, who's going to be my primary return man next year? Is it going to be Deontay Hardy, or is it going to be Nyheim Hines? And I would kind of try to figure that out. And then I'd probably release the other one outright. And I'd save that $5 million or close to $5 million by just releasing one of them. I know it's probably like, I think it's like 4.6 if you release Hardy, and like just over 4 million if you release Hines.
Yeah, but the two of them, it's 8.7 combined if you were to release it to be able to go through. So I think it's certainly a material number to consider.
So I think for me, like, I would rather like not like have each of them take a pay cut. I'd rather just cut one of them outright and then have the other one take a pay cut. And then I think you can get to around, what that gives you, maybe like $5-6 million in savings, as opposed to the 4 or 5. And to me, yes, Deontay Hardy made the big play at the end of the season, the punt return, and he did make that really big third down catch against the Chiefs. But is that worth, like, I don't think he's even going to get what you had suggested as far as a pay cut on the open market, Greg, which is why I think he would agree to it. And then Nyheim Hines coming back from the injury, to me, it's like, if you cut Nyheim Hines and you say Deontay Hardy's our return man, then I bring back Ty Johnson. If I cut Deontay Hardy and I say Nyheim Hines is my return man, then maybe I go out to the free agent market and look for a guy like Demarcus Robinson or someone else as a veteran receiver, to where that's going to only cost you like under the comp pick bingo threshold. So that's kind of one thing where I was like, I don't want to necessarily keep both of these guys. I'd outright cut one of them and then ask the other one to take a pay cut.
I think it's a valid one. I know a couple of people in the chat mentioned KJ Hamler, who is on a futures contract, that he's also had injury issues in the past. The same we saw. Obviously, they gave Andy Isabella a cup of coffee as a returner at one point during the season. Never really claimed that or ran with it. So, and we don't know. I think there are some guys in the draft. We know that there's going to be some investment in receiver. It's very possible one of the receivers they bring in also has return ability, and all of a sudden that opens up some options for it. So I will say, I like the idea of having one of them as a returner, but filling that role cheaper and getting all 8.7 million back from cutting both of those is a tempting opportunity to be able to go through. Ant, how about you? Anything else that stuck out to you outside my list?
No, I was just to piggyback on Tilt's point and real quickly mention the biggest thing I really wanted to drive home. I think the extensions for Rasul Douglas and Taron Johnson are both extremely important. One from a cap space creation perspective, but those are the two. I said this in a tweet about Taron, but I really could have said it about Rasul Douglas as well. Like, that's such a perfect marriage of like why you do, like how to knock down someone's cap hit while also doing something good for the team. Like they're both good players. They both play important positions. You would like them here for a couple more years. I know a couple people push back on Twitter because Taron Johnson's had some concussions. I'm not too worried about it. Given his age, the important position that he plays, how well he plays it. Similar conversation for Rasul. I love the idea of extending both of these guys who are on the last year of their deal in 2024, knocking down that cap hit a little bit this year, which helps you obviously this year, but then you're also locking up dudes for a couple more years minimum who are very good, fit the system, fit the scheme. I love Tilt's points though. I think Deontay Hardy, I've been saying it for a bit on the shows the past like month or so. I think Deontay Hardy's like a sneaky cut candidate. Given now, I'm also going to speak out of both sides of my mouth here. And it's similar to a point you said earlier, Greg. I don't like the idea of like cutting someone or releasing someone at a position when you immediately then have, like, it creates a hole that you immediately have to fill, which you already have to do at wide receiver because Gabe Davis is probably gone. Trent Sherfield is a free agent, like minimum right there. You have to fill those two spots. If you get rid of Deontay Hardy, you then have to fulfill another spot. But I just think given what he did under Dorsey and then also not having production under Brady, there's something I feel like on his end. He was a major disappointment for me, I think for a lot of Bills fans, but the Deontay Hardy I saw, the Deontay Hardy I saw, and I had some people be like, oh, like you guys in the film room said he was going to be sweet. The Deontay Hardy that I saw in New Orleans, like on New Orleans Saints tape, is not the Deontay Hardy I saw as a route runner, as a pace, urgency. You just did not see it. And I don't know if I know we had conversations in the chat about it. Like, is he upset about his role? So when he does get out there, he's like, I'm not getting the ball here. Like, screw this. I don't feel like running. And I know Josh, I know this is probably like a faux pas because Josh Allen's amazing and he can never do anything wrong. But maybe he was like a little frustrated that Josh was never looking his way and not throwing deep and not hitting him on routes where he was a primary or was an open guy. Or maybe, again, he's just upset with being a coverage puller consistently. But you didn't see that production. I hoped a little bit maybe Brady would unlock him a bit. You did not get that. Similar to Tilt's point as well, if he does test the open market, I don't think he has a lot of leverage. Like, where are you going to go? Who's taking a flyer on you? You're probably getting like a 1 year, $3 million deal somewhere if you go out there to the open market. And even from a special team standpoint, I was looking this up as I was speaking last year in 2023, he had 26 punt returns, which is like, I don't know, 1 point something a game. With the way, and this breaks my heart, Devin Hester is one of my favorite football players of all time. Shout out to him making the Hall. I hate what's become, and I know it's for a safety perspective, so I don't want to be insensitive, but I hate what's become for like the kickoff return game, but even the punt return game as well. There's so many just fair catches or letting the ball bounce or it goes out of bounds. Having a returner really is just, it's kind of useless on kickoffs because everything's fair caught or kicked out of the end zone. And even punts, again, Hardy had 26 this year. Also, Sean McDermott sucks as a defensive coordinator and they can't force punts anyway. Ha ha ha. But I don't think that need of using him as a returner is enough to keep him. I think he's a sneaky cut candidate. I wouldn't mind moving on from him. The only reason I don't is because it creates another hole that you then have to fill. Nyheim Hines, I'm a little more pro keeping. I also have no problem getting rid of him outright. I like the idea of the pay cut purely because he does have a dynamic skill set that I think pairs very well with how Joe Brady uses running backs. And the idea of him and James Cook coming out of the backfield, running Texas routes and angle routes and rail routes and screen pieces and just what he can do from an electricity and a juice standpoint as an actual like receiver out of the backfield and with his pass protection and what he does, I think he's a good fit. But I also have no problem cutting him outright because no disrespect to running backs, like you're pulling dudes off the scrap heap and they're providing value exactly like Ty Johnson or Latavius Murray. So a big proponent of the extension for Taron and Rasul. And I could go either way on just outright getting rid of Hardy and Nyheim Hines.
I want to piggyback on that too. I agree with Till. And honestly, I'm really pro getting rid of both these guys. And one, I think Deontay Hardy actually might want it. He put out a tweet of not getting the opportunity that I think he thought he was going to get in Buffalo. And part of that was the slot position wasn't defined, right? Khalil Shakir had a very up and down year one, and he started to trend in some the right ways, but he wasn't the guy that we saw here this past season, not 2021. I'm talking about the last year. And so that's the job. They brought in a number of guys. They brought in Trent Sherfield. They brought in Deontay Hardy. Then they had Khalil Shakir to throw a bunch of crap at a wall and see what sticks. Khalil Shakir stuck. We got that role figured out. And Deontay Hardy is frustrated. So I think that one's an easy one that you could just release. You don't have to worry about it. To your point, the return game's not super important. And Hines, this one to me is really on the medicals, right? Like I saw the picture of his knee and the recovery, and I don't know if he's coming back. And running backs you can get a lot of fast, dynamic players that I think we can find to give you that role. And I'm really happy if they can bring Ty Johnson back and go with Cooks and then find a guy that can provide that down the road. The one thing here that I am a little nervous of that I don't know that he would do is Jordan Poyer taking a pay cut. I think he feels like he's already not been treated great,
and
right
it is,
now.
and it is already
I'm not pulling that lever. I'm not pulling that lever.
Yeah, I don't even know if I want to approach the conversation. I think he already probably feels slighted.
I wouldn't want to be the guy in the room telling him.
That's a tough one because I think he's already underpaid. He knows he's underpaid. The market told him. I think that might have even been a bit of a shot to the ego. And he's done a lot for this team. He's played through injuries when they needed him to, and so that's one that, like I said, I wouldn't want to be the one going in there and offering that up.
Yeah. Chris, how about any others that stood out to you?
Yeah, that actually tails off well from talking about Poyer, because like two of the things that I don't want to do, and this is admittedly naive and probably overly sentimental, but I don't want to ask for pay cuts for Mitch Morse and Jordan Poyer. Like we don't talk much about psychology, but like that just seems like a bad message for the locker room, and I don't think Poyer would take it well. Morse would actually probably, he seems like a good guy and might even roll with it, but I hate the message, like it's probably the last year for both of them. And to say, hey, you've been warriors, you've been leaders, you've done everything we've asked, but hey, how about a few bucks back? Because we're in a bit of a pinch. I don't care for the message.
Yeah. I think it's really well said, and I think that some of the other moves, so the numbers that I put together, if all of a sudden you make the harder decisions on Hines and Hardy, you release them at 8.7, all of a sudden it nets out a little bit differently. If you do a Hardy release, a Hines release, and a Tre White restructure, all of a sudden those three things add up to the same as pay cuts for each of them and a pay cut for Morris and Poyer, and you're able to have a more even-handed approach to it. All right, so in our kind of our one of our last segments here, I wanted to go through some of the upcoming pending free agents, and I'm going to make this a bit of a kind of grab bag here that will go around, and we'll start with you, Anthony. I'm going to show the list of our upcoming potential free agents. There's a healthy amount of them. Obviously, some of them, I don't think there's a ton of discussion on Damian Harris or Linval Joseph or Cam Lewis, but the ones that are out there in potential for comp picks, because I think they could earn enough money. I think Gabe Davis could be there. I actually did a little bit of work with the guys from Over the Cap who do some awesome work on the comp pick formula. Last year, the cutoff for a comp pick was 2.6 or a year and a half ago. So the previous year, this past year, it was at about 3.25 million was the lowest comp pick. So it was a 7th rounder when the Jets signed Dan Feeney. At 3.25 million, that was the lowest one that got a comp pick. So it's all going to be numbers above there that get a comp pick this year. In theory, I obviously think AJ Epinesa could. Leonard Floyd and Daquan Jones would not be eligible for a comp pick because they have void years. So when you're released or your contract voids, it does not net out to a comp pick. So if they sign elsewhere, it doesn't even help us, which maybe is a factor in wanting to approach them for a contract. But in theory, maybe Taylor Rapp could. I don't think Dane Jackson gets over 3 million, but I guess in theory it's possible. I think it's Gabe Davis, it's AJ Epinesa, and shockingly, I kind of think Terrell Dotson is the third most likely guy that could get a deal, to be Atlanta's starting middle linebacker, or Arizona's starting middle linebacker, or wherever. I think those are the ones with the potential. I don't think David Edwards did, although he did a nice job. Same with Taylor Rapp. I'd be surprised if they get twice as much as they got the year before, but you never know. So on this list, and who is someone that you have in mind here that we need to, look at as both a priority, and where is the cutoff of how much you'd be willing to pay them before it gets to, hey, that's too much, we wish you all the best?
I'm going to shock everybody here and say Daquan Jones.
He should be the number one pick.
No.
I'd be mad if he wasn't.
One that I'm sure no one thought about bringing back in any way, shape, or form. I'm so worried about the defensive, not worried, but just, I guess, worried or concerned about how much work is going to have to go into the defensive line this offseason, considering right now for 2024, they only have 3 edges under contract and 3 defensive tackles. Depending on how you view Cameron Klein, technically it's 4 edges and 2 defensive tackles, where you're looking at Von Miller, Greg Rousseau, Kingsley Jonathan, Ed Oliver, Ilianku, and Cameron Klein. So even, and I've said this a bunch too, like
huge investment needed.
Yes. Even if all 6 of those dudes were all pro studs, you still need to add to this defensive line on the edge and in the interior. All 6 are not studs. There's questions about Von Miller. This group needs serious surgery at the edge and in the interior. Daquan has been awesome. I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. If he doesn't get hurt this year, he was on track and trend to be an all-pro this year with what he was doing against the pass and against the run. He's a good character dude. He knows his role. He's smart as hell. He pairs very well stylistically with Ed Oliver. I like that market value right there of like 6.8. And I'm looking at pulled up Spot Tracks, average annual value of interior defensive tackles. And I'm cool going up to the 7-ish, 8-ish million. DJ Jones is there at 10. Sheldon Rankins is 9.7. Larry Ogunjobi's 9.5. And then Danico Autry's at like 7.6. I think given the age, I understand why he'd be like knocked a little bit. I love that market value. I'd be fine going up as high as like 8 million per year. Greg, I think you had a tweet earlier this week or last week. I love that for like the 2-year, $15 million deal and how you had broken out. I think that's a delicious sweet spot type of range. I'd be cool going as high as 8 million, even if it's a 1-year, 8 million or like a 2-year, 16, and you break it down from an average annual value perspective. I think he deserves the money wherever he goes. Like if he comes back to Buffalo, he deserves to get paid. If he wants to try and cash in somewhere else or chase a ring, whatever he wants, it's up to him. He's a tremendous player. But I think he's a huge priority for the Bills, given the specific position he plays, the larger grouping, what he brings, and the known quantity that he represents.
Yeah. Guess who else liked that tweet? Daquan Jones.
Yeah, I bet he likes a lot of people being like, hey, we should pay this guy $15 million. He's like, yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
He was liking everything that day. He was liking
correct.
That day.
He was a big fan of a lot of the support that day. I agree. And I think also, I think some people get nervous about age, and there are a lot of positions that you should get nervous about age. Specifically, one tech defensive tackle is one that very regularly plays well into their mid-30s.
Linval Joseph just plays pretty good for the Bills at 35.
Yeah, it's a spot where it's like grown man strength is a real thing. Like he has that grown man strength. And he's also spoke incredibly well of Marcus West, the new defensive line coach, about Babbage being the defensive coordinator. I think he's really happy about a lot of the moves that direction, and spoke really, really well of Babbage and McDermott in his defensive coaching role. So I think he's saying all the things that indicate he wants to be back. I think the team wants him back. He's the one I feel the most confident. If you ask me to gauge this list, who's the most likely to be back on this list, he's real, real close to the top of that list for me. Aaron, who's another guy that you not only want back, but will be willing to spend a little bit of money on to bring back?
It's just Daquan Jones, to be honest, for me. Linval would be one that I would, to your point, you've said it before, where it's let's just get him back, and then you can just do whatever you want until November, and then come play, and then we'll just have you.
He's not on he doesn't need the physically unable to perform list. He needs the physically doesn't feel like performing list.
Just wear some sweats and hang out. Yeah, no, you're good. Just hang out and do half seasons for us, because this is really right now going into the offseason, interior defensive line is my priority number one. I know everybody wants to talk, you got to get a wide receiver no matter what in the first round. I'm not debating asset allocation. I'm just saying for the Buffalo Bills going into this offseason, they need defensive linemen. You want to keep these linebackers clean. You want interior pressure. You want a nice stable of interior defensive linemen. I do think you've got some stuff going on in the edges. I think they'll continue to stack that up. I think they'll also address that in free agency, but you got to continue to stack that up. But a guy on this list, I'm not going to pay him a lot of money, but a guy that I really want the Bills to get back, and I think it is a priority, is Ty Johnson. I know running backs grow on trees. I know you can draft them up, but I'd rather not use draft picks right now. There's so many needs on the defensive side of the ball. You got to get probably even a couple wide receivers in this building. You got a guy that fits this offense that is a nice counterbalance to James Cook. I'd like to just get him back and then deal with running back 3. I think he was a nice piece that earned a chance to be back. And I don't think you'd have to pay him all that much. Running backs aren't getting paid in the NFL, and he'd be happy to come back. Yep.
Tilt, how about you? What's your next name on this list that you want back, and how much would you be willing to pay?
Man, so like I want AJ Epinesa back, but for the comp pick, bingo, I'd almost rather take a shot at bringing Leonard Floyd back, because I think AJ Epinesa, for one, is going to get more money on the open market than Leonard Floyd, and he's going to get term multiple years. And number two, Leonard Floyd did have 10.5 sacks last season, but over the last 6 games of the season, and including the playoffs, which is another 2, he only had 1 sack. So I feel like
it did weirdly seem to fade, and I wasn't sure if that was him or the system or the nobody opposite him.
But did he have a Steph Diggs injury nobody knew about also?
He kept having moments where he'd like get up real slow, where he's working his shoulder or working a knee. I feel like he was another sneaky, like banged up guy that we didn't hear about because he just did not look the same.
And injuries have been an issue with Floyd in the past as well.
They have.
To consider.
And I probably wouldn't give him the $8 million that Spot Track is putting up on the screen now.
Real quick, too, can we all acknowledge a little bit that the Spot Track's
correct
calculators
yes.
not I operate their calculator? Maybe there's a chance.
So
I will say they do a lot of good things. Their market value analysis is probably the least accurate thing that they do.
So Floyd was what, $7 million last year, right? I'd be kind of comfortable maybe being like, hey, would you come back for 5, 5.5, 6? Like, I'd be okay with a 1 year 5, 5.5, 6 on the table for Leonard Floyd, because look, IDL, huge priority. Defensive line in general, to me, is a huge priority. You need bodies right now. You need to bring some guys back. Like Aaron said, like maybe bring Linval back. You got to bring Daquan back, but you have to fill out this roster with at least like some serviceable players, especially, interior, yes, but you got to have some flexibility going into the draft. You can't be pigeonholed into saying like, oh, we're going to have to take an edge early or whatever it may be, or we're going to have to take an IDL early. You got to give yourself flexibility and you got to get bodies back. So to me, I think you try to get Leonard Floyd back if you can. It would be interesting to see like what other kind of veteran free agent edge rushers are out there on the open market. But I think Floyd kind of fit well and kind of played as a role, filling in for Von Miller, played pretty well early in the season. I think he complemented Greg Rousseau pretty well, being more of like that bendier edge rusher, pass rushing type guy, whereas Greg Rousseau on the opposite side was more of the lengthier sort of all around edge setter. So look, I'd try to get Leonard Floyd back, but I'm not gonna play hard. Like, I'm not gonna play hardball with him. I'm gonna give him like a cut, like an option. And if he doesn't like it, then so be it. Good luck on the open market.
Well, and a big piece that we saw last year in that veteran free agent market, it was stacked late in, and we got Leonard Floyd, and Eric and I were both very excited about it because we thought he was going to be out of our price range. But in hindsight, when you look at some of the other pieces that also signed, Justin Houston was like $2 million. Jadeveon Clowney was $2.5 million. Hold on, let me see what the other one was. Yannick Ngakoue, I think, might have been the one guy who got more. He got 10.5 million when he signed. He was the one guy who got more than Floyd. But there is value in playing that game of chicken with that veteran free agent market, that we might not know the answer to that one until the draft or after the draft, or maybe one of those guys right before the draft. that wants to try to capitalize while there's still openings. And I don't mind that idea. So maybe the guy we sign in free agency at defensive end is not the exciting one. It's like a slight Shaq Lawson upgrade of a run defender, can hold the edge, a guy that a lot of fans are going to be like, wait, who is that guy? That he's not going to be some huge name. And then we wait and try to win the musical chairs game on one of those better. Well, it's not crazy that the name actually
guy maybe too.
Yeah, a guy who maybe can kick into 3 tech, in the right spots to be able to do something like that. But Chris, how about you? What is the next name on this list that you would have as a priority, and what's the most you'd be willing to pay?
Yeah, so I'd bring Dane Jackson back, for probably even a multi-year deal. In my notes, I've got a projection of him of 2 years for $4 million, 3 guaranteed. It's I don't want to steal Aaron's phrase, but adequacy is underrated. I'd be completely willing to bring Dane back. Because if next year's rash of injuries is in the secondary, well, then you need every bit of depth you can have. And even though we've talked about, or fans have complained about, some of his problems with things at the catch point, and some of that's justified, some of it isn't. But he's a remarkable run defender as well, and is a significant addition to the team in that aspect. So I'd be completely content with adequate backup cornerback play at $2 million a year.
Aaron's excited. He supports it fully.
That was a beautiful soliloquy of adequacy.
David, how about you? What's your draft pick on this list?
I don't know what my draft pick would be, but I'll go outside the box, and I'm gonna say David Edwards, because the Bills have gotten the best offensive line play that in 2023 that they had in a long
Josh's
time.
career, Josh's whole career.
I mean, it was really good. All of them were all really consistent throughout the whole year. They all started all regular season and postseason games together, which only leads me to believe that's not going to happen in 2024. And you already have Ryan Bates under contract, and they like him. They like that he's a center, guard, versatile type. That's fine. That's cool. That's good. Having someone like David Edwards, who's started plenty of games, has been a part of really good teams, and been a relatively important piece on some pretty good offensive lines with the Rams. And obviously he's familiar with Aaron Cromer from his time there. I wouldn't give him like a ton of money necessarily, and maybe there's a team that saw him with the Bills and sort of the packages that they used him for. Maybe some teams like, we just need somebody here that we feel relatively confident in. Let's throw him a little bit more money than whoever's going to pay him. Maybe that's outside the price range. But if you can get him back for essentially that number, right? I am all for that, because we see it every week in the NFL. Teams need offensive line play, and they need it bad. The Bills have good offensive line play, at least average to above average offensive line play across the board at this point. But you can't rely or hope that, it's going to continue to be that way the entire time. And they do like to use some extra offensive linemen in personnel packages. That's where you saw a lot of David Edwards last year. You bring him in as that jumbo tight end, and especially when you're running more 12 tight end or 12 personnel, that's a sort of way to 12 tight ends. That would be great. Would kill for that. I mean, Josh Allen was supposed to be a tight end coming out, right? So, but getting more of those jumbo packages, I think that's something that you see. I guarantee you, if you look at Sean Payton offenses in New Orleans, you probably see a good deal of that. And I imagine that the way that they use David Edwards in that same sort of way, you feel good about that, because it seemed like every time he was brought in, it was like, yeah, this is this is working. So I'm a big proponent of David Everett's coming back. Whether or not they're able to is a different story. It's sort of what we were talking about earlier with Leonard Floyd, right? Where it's like, maybe the Bills are able to bring him back for a good deal, but there's also a team that's like, I don't know, like the Falcons, right? With Raheem Morris, who had Leonard Floyd for a couple of years as defensive coordinator. They still need an edge rusher badly. It wouldn't surprise me if they just said, hey, Leonard Floyd, come on in and we'll pay you a little bit more than Buffalo will. Yeah. So it's
very possible. A couple guys I'll be surprised, similar to Deontay Hardy. I don't think Poona Ford loved his playing time and opportunity in Buffalo. I'll kind of be surprised if he signs back. One name that didn't come up is Taylor Rapp. I certainly would welcome him back. He wasn't perfect, but I think he was nice in that 3 safety rotation. I do expect that if Matt Milano and Terrell Bernard are both healthy this year, we won't see that 3rd safety and dime linebacker look, because you're not going to take Bernard and Milano off the field. We're not going to need to platoon the way we did with Terrell Dotson, but I do like having that depth, especially with Jordan Poyer at the age he's at. If we have him back again, I've always seen Rapp as a better backup for Poyer. Then I still think we need that center fielder, rangy, athletic guy. But I like the idea of Taylor Rapp being there for special teams, 4 different looks in the secondary, and as a insurance policy for Poyer. So he'd be one more name that I would bring up there. So, all right, we've now gone through some of the more controversial pieces, how we would make cap space, how we would go through some of our pending free agents. I'm going to go around to everybody here in the room. Everybody gets one more piece of whether it's a move we didn't talk about that's on the team, or where, now that we've made some money, where your priority list would go, or what your one wish list item would be. Whether it's, wanting to look to the trade market and take advantage of something there, wanting to splurge on this one position, wanting to make sure that we go in this other position more fully to the draft, whatever it may be. I'll go around to everybody here. We'll start with you, Mr. Fox. We'll go down there and work our way back around. Any one spot, where is your one wish list item or a fun move we haven't done, or some other thing you'd like to see this offseason now that we've created all kinds of extra money to spend on the salary cap?
So, obviously, James Cook, Pro Bowler. We all, I think, are in agreement that he is the lead back moving forward and should be. I think that while we're generally kind of leaning more towards it would be nice if Nyheim Hines took a pay cut, it also wouldn't be surprising if he just gets outright cut. Latavius Murray, probably not coming back. Ty Johnson, like we talked about, it'd be nice to have him back. But I would feel more comfortable about Ty Johnson being running back 3 than I would about him being running back 2. And as far as running back 2 goes, Aaron, I kind of agree with Aaron in the sense that I don't necessarily want to use a draft pick on that, because you can get solid free agent backs for pretty cheap. And one guy that I liked last year, and I kind of got some flack for saying that I felt like he could still play and be an important part for a team, was Ezekiel Elliott, who I felt like showed that he couldn't play that complementary role when he was in New England. And obviously that whole offense was such a mess the entire year because of a number of issues, largely because their passing game was non-existent. But I think having somebody that not only can just provide a different level of physicality that James Cook doesn't really have, which is fine, because James Cook does all these other things. Ezekiel Elliott is a great pass protector, and he was like that in Dallas. I would imagine if you go back through what he did in New England, that you'd probably see similar things, although maybe not, because Bill O'Brien is just so obsessed with empty sets, so maybe not. But I think that having somebody like that you can this is why we wanted somebody like Latavius Murray last year, right? It's because we all felt like he's going to provide some physicality between the tackles, and he's going to be a really good pass protector.
Yeah.
So you're getting this same sort of thing with Ezekiel Elliott, and to be perfectly honest, probably brings a little more juice than Latavius Murray, and also a way better pass catcher than Latavius Murray. So that's sort of who I liked last year. I think there's other guys on the market, right? Like an Austin Eckler. Who knows what kind of money he's going to get. Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, they're probably going to get some sort of deal that's probably not appropriate for what they'll end up producing. Gus Edwards is interesting. I would be intrigued by that. I don't know exactly what that money would look like. I feel like Elliott having sort of a low-key but good season in New England last year, and being in New England last year where like nothing really went well. But for people who, do their work, do their homework, and sit there and say, hey, this dude's still got something in the tank, and we know that some of his other things that he could do age really well. I mean, just being able to catch the ball cleanly and consistently out of the backfield is something that can age well.
Here, real quick quiz. Who's older, Ezekiel Elliott or Gus Edwards?
Well, I have it right in front of me, so I'd be cheating.
Yeah. Gus Edwards is 3 months older than Ezekiel Elliott, and somebody could have just won a ton of money off of me asking me that, because I would not have guessed that was the case. Same thing. Austin Eckler is older than Ezekiel Elliott. He's not quite as. Boston Scott is older than Ezekiel Elliott. A bunch of upcoming free agents. Kareem Hunt, same idea.
So. Yeah, that was my guy last year. Yeah, just bring somebody who still has some juice, not going to be in a lead role, because we know who's in the lead role, can still do things from a passing perspective while still giving you what you want to complement James Cook on the ground.
I like it. Chris, what is your wish? It could be just like David. It could be a specific player. It could be a position. It can be a kind of move. What is something you want to see this offseason?
I want to go back in time about a half an hour, and you don't give Ant the first pick, and I get to say Daquan Jones, because I want Daquan Jones. Honestly, we've talked several times tonight. Defensive line has to be filled. However they do it, I want that to start with Daquan. But if it can't be Daquan, then my pie in the sky, my money is no issue. Like, I want DJ Reader. Like, fill that line, with somebody you can count on in the run and is going to give you some pass rush. I just like him as a player. If you'd asked me this question 5 years ago, I would have said Fletcher Cox, just because I like him. Give me DJ Reader.
I like it. What was his injury late in the season? That wasn't anything that was going to carry to next year, was it?
I don't even recall right now.
I thought it was a shoulder, if I remember right. I don't think it was something. I knew it was a quad, so I don't think that's going to be something. But yeah, something to check. But he certainly is a stellar player to go through here. Coming in from the chat here, we should trade for Brandon Ayuk. So I know that came up in a couple different social media posts there. Tilt, what is your wish list that you want to see this offseason?
Yeah, look, I'm trying to kind of get in the mind of Brandon Beane, and as far as my wish list is concerned, I think it's going to be a lot of like maybe low-key savvy type moves. I do think Daquan Jones needs to be priority number one to kind of let all the other dominoes kind of fall into place on the defensive line, but you need to get at least your starting 4 defensive line intact, I think, before like the bulk of free agency in the draft. So you need to have Rousseau. Obviously, Ed Oliver, Daquan, and Vaughn, I think, will be your 4 if you can get Daquan back. But I'll say this. I think, Taylor Rapp's a free agent. Micah Hyde's gone. Jordan Poyer's on the last year of his deal. I wouldn't mind taking a look in the free agent market at safety. I really like Alohi Gilman from the Chargers. Finally got a chance to start this year. 14 games, had 2 picks, 3 forced fumbles. Really played well in coverage when he got a chance. The Chargers defense, hard to kind of evaluate because they weren't that great, but I do like Gilman. And I did talk to Nate, our guy Nate, a little bit in the DMs about him. He's a Notre Dame guy. Nate kind of sees him more as maybe a depth guy, but that could maybe parlay his starting experience last year into a more permanent role. We've seen this happen with the likes of like Jordan Poyer in the past come to the Bills. Micah Hyde was a part-time player for the Packers came here and kind of parlayed that to a full-time role. I'm not saying he's going to do that, but I think an under the radar maybe type of move would be to go out and get a guy like Gilman, give yourself flexibility in the draft. That doesn't mean you don't have to, that doesn't mean you don't take a safety in the draft at some point, but looking a bit into the future on that back end that has been so stable would be nice to kind of get a guy now that 4 years in, got a chance to start. I think he's a good player. I'd like to see him come in.
Sneaky. I like that one. Aaron, how about you? What's something you want to see from the Bills this offseason now that we created all kinds of fun cap space?
Yes, well, obviously repetitive of Daquan Jones being that, not splash, but the big bring back, get him back. And in that same vein, there's some other guys in the interior defensive line. Again, this is my number one priority. I'd love to establish this room going into the draft as much as you can. And there's some better names that I'd be interested in at least kicking the tires. And I wouldn't mind bringing Quentin Jefferson back. I think he can do a lot of versatility things along the line. He still had 30 something pressures, 8 sacks a year ago in the New York Jets defense. And he's aging out there, but to the point, these big guys, that strength ages out pretty well. Al Woods is another like just big block of a man that I think in that one tech type role could just be a guy as he's aging out here. Although he's 36, he might hang it up. I know he had an injury. He might call it quits. But in that sort of Linval Joseph, if one of those guys is going to be that, hey, you don't have to play at the beginning of the season, but we just want big bodies, vets on this roster. I think you have a lot of that baked in here. Tier Tart is another one that's a little younger that he might get more money on the market than I'd like. But these are the type of rotational guys. We saw it before Daquan Jones guy here. That was similar to the guard position for Brandon Beane and not being able to hit one tech and not being able to get good depth behind Ed Oliver to get that rotation that they want. And I think you'll be able to address some of it in the draft, but I think this might be one of those positions where they do have to patch it together with some aging vets that maybe are taking lower deals.
I like it. Ant, what is your wish for this offseason?
Man, I really want to go big splash and be like Antoine Winfield or like Justin Matabuke. Like I would like love those. I'm going to stick in the safety market. I've talked about it a bunch on Twitter. I don't think this is going to be surprising to anyone. There is some debate on where he's playing, how it's going. I'm taking a shot on Jeremy Chin. I watched his 2023 tape. So he was the apex and a big nickel for Carolina, but he was always an actual like safety prior before that and was just awesome. Anytime you watched, went back to the 2022 tape and he's playing regular safety and single high looks, split field looks like, and the one that really got me, they're playing the Saints and granted it's a 2 high look, but Chris Olave runs a post. He turns the wrong way, but speed turns, stays over the top and runs Olave down on this like 50-yard post. And as soon as Walter gets it. And as soon as that happened, I was like, okay, granted that's 2022, but he hasn't suffered any major injury that would make me think the juice is gone or the speed is gone. He has had back-to-back like soft tissue injuries in 2022 and 2023 that landed him on the IR, quad 1 year, hamstring the other. But between that and some of the usage, I'm hoping he could be like a Jordan Poyer dollar amount signing when Poyer came here in 2017. I think the opportunity to bring him in, I do think I would rather have him be fully into more of the Poyer role than the Hyde role. But I like the pairing of Hyde or of Chin and Poyer. I think Chin still has the juice to cover in single high and split field looks. And then he can take over for Poyer after this year. And then you pair him with a safety that you either drafted this year or attacking safety at that spot next year. I also, just with some of the things they've done, this is a little more advanced, like schematically, like some of the things they did with dropping Taron Johnson as a split field safety, you can start to get real creative with a combo of Chin and Poyer and Taron Johnson in certain high leverage situations and confusing defenses. And then with Bernard and Milano, like your whole back 7 package and simulated pressures and who's covering where and who's playing man and what you're doing, it gets to be a real nice, fun schematic conversation. So I'm going to keep banging the table for Jeremy Chin, mainly because I do like the fit. I like his skill set. And I do think that his past couple of years could knock his price down. Like when initially, if you're talking to me at the end of 2022, I'm thinking he's not going to be at Antoine Winfield level, but he's going to be costly. I think he would be in the Duggar-ish tier had 2023 not happened in the back-to-back injuries. I would love Duggar. I just think he's going to cost too much, so I don't think the conversation is even worth having. Also a sneaky one. This is more splash. I don't think it breaks the bank, but it's going to hit double-digit average annual value. Jonathan Greenard, The defensive end or Grenard, depending on how you want to look at it. The defensive end / edge from Houston, 12.5 sacks last year, 12th in the league or 10th in the league, just flashed a bunch. I think Von gets better this year. I still don't know what we're going to get out of him. I would like to lock down some consistency at edge for the next several years. I think Greenard is on the upswing in terms of what he brings. From a move standpoint, he plays the run just as much as he does from a pass rush standpoint. 53 pressures last year, 37 stops. I think there's a good chance he probably gets re-upped and is made a core piece in that Houston Texans defense. But he's somebody who I think kind of fits in that mold of you can lock him down, even if it is like a 3-year 11 mil or 3-year 10 mil per, like not 11 mil total, 11 mil per. I think what he brings off the edge would be tremendous. And then you don't have to continue to do this edge dance the next several years trying to fill a spot. But again, I think that's still somewhat realistic, but I think that's much more pie in the sky given what I think he's going to cost on the open market.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I would love to see any of those guys. I think there's a decent opportunity for it. I think that we're probably in a position similar to last season where we're not going to see a lot of splurges, but maybe. I know the deal that Leonard Floyd was offered was like up to $9 million. The Connor McGovern deal was $7.5 million. I think that's probably where our one splurge could be in that ballpark, and I'll go a different route. I do think safety is a very logical one. Edge is a very logical one.
Can I ask you a real quick question, Greg, just while we're on that? Yeah. If you had to say, like, from an average annual value perspective, what is like the highest dollar amount that you think we could bring someone in on as like a splurge? If we went like big ticket item, what's that average annual value look like? You think it's pushing double digits, or is it sticking like?
Well, it is potential for double digits because you got to remember when we signed Von Miller to 6 years, $120 million, his cap hit in the first year was $5 million.
Yeah.
So they can do any of those things. If they have a guy that they think fits the number, you can make the first year of a cap hit really, really low. And going through some of those different spots. So I don't think it's crazy that if it lined up perfectly and they really loved, I think Grenard or Duggar or Chin are the kind of splurge moves that would actually make sense. It's a real team need, but it makes sense. And if you did a 4-year, $48 million deal at $12 million a year for Kyle Duggar, you could make the first year's cap hit $4 million and then deal with the other 44 million over the coming 3 years.
Yeah.
It's doable. I don't know that they want to sign up for that. I don't know that that's what they're looking for, but if the right deal comes along, they can make that work for sure. So mine is, I'll go one other area because I do think those two are maybe even more likely, but there is a combination of one of the best free agent wide receiver markets we've seen in a long time, where you have, it's T. Higgins and Michael Pittman Jr. and Mike Evans and Marquise Brown and Calvin Ridley and some really big names, and a historically deep wide receiver draft class where I think at some point there's 3 or 4 guys in my mind, someone's going to lose out on this game of musical chairs and the big double-digit average annual value deals, and they all think they're going to get 10 million plus, and one of these 4 guys is not, and I don't know which one it is, but if we have a way of getting, in my mind, it's Tyler Boyd, Curtis Samuel, Kendrick Bourne, or my choice is Darnell Mooney, and that if we can snag whichever of those guys, there's some guys below there that intrigue me, that I think are interesting, and that, I'm cool taking a shot on a Donovan Peoples-Jones or a Greg Dortch or a Quez Watkins. There's some guys that I don't mind doing, but those guys aren't coming in and starting. Those guys aren't coming in and making a significant impact. If we are able to get one of those 4, Curtis Samuel's best season was under Joe Brady in Carolina. Darnell Mooney pegs a bajillion different advanced metrics of wide receiver value with bad quarterback play, and that like so much of it was not on him in his production in Chicago with what he put up. I think Kendrick Bourne has been in a very similar situation with a lot of really poor quarterback play in different situations. And obviously Tyler Boyd has been like a third banana in Cincinnati. And I think each of them have the potential, and whichever one isn't going to get the deal that they think they're going to get, and we just have the one guy that gets waited out, and then the handful of teams that maybe could spend money see the upcoming draft class and like, well, let's hold off. If we can go into the offseason where all of a sudden we've re-signed Daquan Jones, we've added a boring but contributing edge setting defensive end, and we've signed Darnell Mooney, all of a sudden now the draft is wide open. And you could take Cam Kitchens in the first round. You could pick whoever you want because you're not, pigeonholed into, oh, it has to be this spot. I want to just check enough boxes that, yeah, we all pretty much know what positions the first 4 rounds of the draft should be, but I don't want it that the order has to be in a certain set. I don't care if the wide receiver is in the second round and the safeties in the third round and the D tackles in the first and the defensive ends in the fourth. Let it be whatever makes sense, and whoever's the best guy on the board, and a handful of those moves, if you get the right guy to fall into the right spot. We're going to have a couple moves. I think we see another Deontay Harding type signing, another Connor McGovern type signing, and another Leonard Floyd type signing. I don't think we see higher than that. It's like I said, Anthony, to your question, we can, but I don't think so. I think it's going to be those kind of moves. And if we make a couple of them, we can go into this draft a lot more comfortable than we have been. So thank you guys. This has been awesome. This has been a ton of fun. One of our favorite shows every single year. All kinds of different stuff that there's some homework. There was a really cool matrix that we're going to share on Twitter that Chris put together, looking through some of the like total points earned and a good metric that showed the value of where different pieces are. If you're curious about some of the players last year, a handful of different things that we prepped for this that didn't have time to get into the show that I'm going to share in a couple tweets following up some of the things from the show. But anything else for the people? Anything you guys have that we didn't have a chance to go over tonight, or that you want to share with everybody before we close out?
I'll go real quick. I think you're piggyback on your point at the end. We've seen this happen year in and year out pretty much for the Bills. Granted, there's usually some kind of positional need that hangs above others come draft time, but we've seen them so much try to plug as many holes as possible to go into the draft with that best player available situation. And that's like kind of been their MO and their business model. And from a free agency standpoint, there is an opportunity for them to bring in some more kind of name guys. But I think everybody should brace for a whole bunch of 1 to 2 year deals on guys where you're like, okay, like no one that you're like, oh, but just a whole bunch so they can batten down the hatches and go into the draft knowing like, hey, we think there's going to be a run on receivers and a run on quarterbacks and a run on offensive tackles and somebody sweet on the defensive line, either at edge or interior or at safety, is going to fall to us at 28, and we're going to capitalize on that piece.
Yeah. I have one thing for the people real quick, and it's super important this time of year as we get into free agency. It is not resign, it is re-sign. So people that are not watching, you have to put a hyphen before sign, or you were telling somebody to stop playing football. And we don't want that for a lot of the guys. There's some guys you do want to resign, but it's not what you mean.
I will never forget when, back when Mike and Mike in the Morning was a thing, and watching live as Mike Golick read the ticker that he saw. Oh my gosh, I can't believe Colin Powell resigned his position. No, Mike, Colin Powell resigned.
Yeah, it's
he
super
did
important.
Not resign. He did not resign.
Yeah.
During free agency here, very, very important.
As a former Lee County spelling bee participant, I always appreciate that message. So
very good, very, very good.
Also, just as an addition to what I talked about earlier, for those who don't know, Ezekiel Elliott is an investor in Encore Golf, which is a golf company in Buffalo. So
Josh Allen is actually
I'm just saying.
Josh
you
is
know?
the sponsor athlete for Encore. He's like one of their brand
There you
ambassadors.
go.
So does Eric Wood.
Wearing the hat. Yeah, I saw that.
All right, guys, make sure you're checking out all the shows we have going on here. All kinds of good stuff. If you're curious, we just put out a survey from the main handle on Cover One, looking to see all the different things that you guys want to see from us from a content standpoint. And if you're curious of how you can get even more of that content, check out some of the messages here. Many people ask us the best way to support us here at Cover One, and that is to sign up to become a Cover One Pass member. That contribution helps give us the access to all the data and information we use to create the content that you love.
And I think most importantly, brings you into our community of insiders. It's a great community based on Slack. I know a lot of people don't want to be on social media anymore or be in on those conversations. We bring all of it to you right in our great community of educated fans. And most importantly, you get access to our content creators.
Even better than that, everybody loves merch. You get awesome t-shirts, a cool decal, and a letter from the Cover One team signed directly to you.
All for $60. That gets you the entire season, next year's free agency and draft. $60. Click the link in the description. Cover One Insider. Become one today.
So thank you guys on behalf of David Fox, Chris Seth, Dave Tilton, Aaron Quinn, Anthony Prohaska, and our fantastic producer, Chris Kepner. You have been listening to the Cover One Buffalo Salary Cap Spectacular, and we are out.